Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for February of 2026. I have 8 albums that I listened to throughout February that I'm going to be talking about in this video, with time codes in the description for each individual review if you would like to jump around in this video. There were some things I had on my plate that I ended up just pushing off to March because I was listening to so much Ghostface Killah that it bled into my listening time for listening long records. But March will be a much more stacked video. That said, just as scattershot of a month as January was, so strap in for a smattering of opinions, starting with my opinions on...
I'm pleased to report after many attempts I climbed out from the mouth of the gritty abyss. The answer, I'm an idiot, who idiot is this? My mind frame is...
J. Cole is moving so fast that once again, some of the discourse around this J. Cole album, the fall off, has evolved since its release to just a little over a month later, with this whole album no longer being a swan song for J. Cole actually, and he views it more a swan song for the persona of J. Cole. Muddied concepts getting overthought aside, if this is just J. Cole's attempt at a double album, it's a pretty good attempt. I would argue on the other side it ranks maybe among one of J. Cole's best efforts. It isn't perfect. It is a bit dodgy. I think there is the loosest of connections that could be made between both discs. In fact, until this sort of discourse evolved to where it is now, I had this running theory that if this album was really supposed to be J. Cole's last album, the first disc was really only supposed to be it. But then once he actually got wrapped up in like a very prolific beef, he morphed it a bit into this concept about reflecting on music, spreading his love of what hip-hop shaped him across both discs, and evolved it into this record that I think makes for a fun spin, if not a bit too much. Both discs have issues, but they are very different issues. The first disc, I think its biggest issue comes from J. Cole-isms that I really can't stand, in the vein of tone deafness a bit, and safety. It's very much a song that's trying to speak on something bigger, but I think kind of fumbles on how it does so. I think the song itself is very much like indicative of in the story of the album being back at home, and like I think it achieves that thing well. With that aside, I really don't have many issues with the first disc. I think that the first disc is just really, really good. I think it sort of unfolds almost like a drama, and like a sort of two-plot drama, where J. Cole is back home in Fayetteville, and not only rekindles a sort of spark with someone that he used to be really close to, but also gets stuck in some beef with a local guy that really doesn't like him and really has issues with that. And I think that the way that those stories start separate and where they converge is handled well. I think that there's some moments where Cole does some solid storytelling throughout and really strikes a good core of letting his own thoughts stick amidst all of these things going on, like on Run a Train, a song where he really breaks it down internally after seeing the outside world's view on him coming back home on safety. And I think that does a good job at adding to the intensity of Poor Thing, a really good song that has a fucking great instrumental with a skit at the end that very much I could see people being like, that's Cole being corny, but I don't necessarily agree, and I think helps carry the listener into Legacy and Bounce Road Blues really nicely. I think that really the only issues I feel with the album outside of any other nitpicks are maybe sort of like how the last stretch really sort of wraps up. But the thing is, outside of the addresses of conflict and hip-hop and beef and all that through the lenses of some of the songs on the last stretch, like What If, and sort of getting more back to home in the last couple of songs, the second disc strays far from the story that was shaping. It feels like the love interest that was in this completely irrelevant now, and instead J. Cole kind of brings together a second disc that by and large is a an interesting bringing together of songs that don't necessarily all fit together, but still sound nice together. Case in point, the intro is a great example of that in song form. It is a song of 2 parts that I really love. I've been getting miles out of the intro of this song if you follow me on Airbuds, but like, I really enjoy what he does with the 6.5 minute jam that is that song, and I think that it lends to, and it very much is indicative of what the second disc has in store. Some bit longer songs, J. Cole's gonna sing more, and he's gonna have some concepts in those songs that are a bit more focalized and not tied to any grander concepts. With, aside from, again, showing a love of hip-hop that shaped him. You know, some of the instrumentals on tracks like Who the Fuck Is You, and obviously I Love Her Again because of how it interpolates Common's classic, I Used to Love Her. That said, it's a double album that only kind of loosely feels like it ties together. At the end of the day, it's still a good album, but I think that that's kind of strange, that J. Cole had this really good, concise record, and he decided to kind of like go bolder with it. No knock to him for doing so. I think that the going bold lends to some strong moments, but if we're talking like an album, it's a bit much together. I'm still giving it an 8, because it's still really, really good, but I think if we're observing this as a double album, it's kind of a strange one. Especially since he's going so hard on presenting these as a pairing that's supposed to fit under this similar idea of going back home twice over. I think Joji's lost the sauce with records, guys. I think he was a 2-album smasher and then just dipped into disasters. For the opposite reason that I thought was the problem with his like micro pocket project, the one that had ballads on it. This new album, Piss in the Wind, just feels like a whole lot of little things without a whole lot going on outside of the grand, sad platitudes that Joji typically stands on. Some of which I do think work. You know, it doesn't all feel like Piss in the Wind, which feels like a very apropos title for how little of this really sticks to me anyway. I really liked the lead single to this, Pixelated Kisses. I put it in the Girl Like Me soundtrack, so it's been an album that's been pretty hefty in my rotation. And there's some interesting sonic deviations outside of that feel like fun places for Joji to go, like Love You Less, or the grandiosity amidst Last of a Dying Breed, but neither of which I feel like stand on anything super deep or even just emotionally strong. You know, I think Hotel California and Tarmac is a really nice 2-piece, and I think Hotel California is a well-penned, simple, but effective, sad song. But there's so many songs on this 21-track just mess that I feel like just could easily fall on the cutting room floor, and people wouldn't really miss them.
I was so fucking done with this album, I didn't even finish filming my review. I thought I had a whole chunk where I talked about other stuff, but I must have not been recording. Either way, this record is a whole lot of fluff. Like his last record, there's just about as much that I like, but with just more bullshit to sift through. Outside of the songs that I mentioned, liking some of the vibes on, I do think that there's a stretch in the record where it feels like it gets a little self-aware, and I kind of like it. It feels like something. It feels like substance. It's after the Four Bats collab, which is like, could have been better. But Can't See Shit in the Club feels like a moment where like Joji feels very self-aware. Feels like this album's been going on for a little while. It's got a lot of nuggets of ideas. I'm gonna have this like really dreary ambient driven song where I just talk about not being able to see shit in the club, and if this doesn't get him, nothing will. And it kind of works. It's kind of funny. It's a kind of a funny moment on this album, and I think it's Sojourn and Did You Know I Love You after that are nice steps up in at least having sounds that are good again and use of sound. Because there's a stretch where I feel like the album really kind of drags before this next little nugget kind of comes in, but then it just kind of goes back to the mediocre flaccidness from there. I think that Joji could do an actual good album again if he wants, and I'm sure he was trying with this one, but I just don't really think that it I just don't think it really worked. I think that it had somewhat of a vision, and it really tries to come around, and it just fails to do so. I'm giving this a 3 out of 10, because it just is something that I will not be respinning, not even the parts that I like, because I'd rather just spin other Joji songs.
County jails in the morning, promise you that I wait. I am not a lyricist, I am just a bastard child, here to experiment.
You want to talk about an album that feels too short, considering how long it's been between releases, though? Baby Keem's Casino, man. I, like a lot of the internet, enjoyed Baby Keem's debut and think that it was a solid splash into a record that felt like it had a vision amidst songs and the like that sort of teased the types of sonics Keem would try to pull together on such an idea. And I think the Casino, for its brief time, feels very concise and purposeful with its time in a way that I at least really admire. It's just an admiration that leaves me wanting to hear more. Not every song, I think, in this pocket project thrives, but there's a lot in this pocket that really works, man. I think the way that he opens this record with this dramatic feel, with this very heartfelt personal storytelling throughout the opening verse, gives way to an extension of that throughout the title track that also acts as a fucking kick the door down banger. I love the beat on that song. I think that it is fantastic, and I think that it helps light the stage up, so to speak, to give this, evocative imagery of a casino a good stage to stand on, while Keem sort of also helps reintroduce his style for those that have been missing it for so long. I think this use of pairs works well after that, with Birds and Bees and Good Flirts coming after that, being these more romance-driven jams that help give the listener a sampling of the other side of the coin, or the poker chip, so to speak, that Keem is using as the fuel for this sophomore outing. I think that Birds and Bees is a bit more straightforward, but an effectively catchy single, where Keem sort of updates the world on how he's been feeling in relationships since the last time we talked about them on the Melodic Blue. And I think the Good Flirts is a great smoothing and slowing down after that to really get central with it. I think that Keem, Momo Boyd, and Kendrick all sound really good on this. I think that it's a really good triage on here that I think helps sort of round out a really solid introductory stretch before the back half of the record really takes those ideas and takes them in various avenues, whether it be, again, the more heartfelt, story-driven, confessional almost style in some instances, songs like House Money or I'm Not a Lyricist, or Highway 95 Part 2, which very much feels more indebted to like direct storytelling, Shining, or flipping the other side of the sensual coin with Sex Appeal, a banger with Too Short, and it's cool to see Baby Keem get to do a West Coast banger with a West Coast vet. I think the Circus Circus freestyle might be the weakest moment on the album, with some wild flows, but flows that I don't think work every single time. I think the album at least rounds itself well after that, with the last couple of songs, if not feeling still a bit too brief. Once the last track is really over, it really feels like it's starting to warm up to something else, and it just doesn't. And it leaves the album feeling very almost incomplete. That being said, I think Casino is a really solid album that, by the by, has more hits than misses, even for such a brief runtime. I'd give it like a 7 out of 10. If it were longer, if it had a little more going on in the pot, I could easily give this like an 8 out of 10, because I think what's here, at least if it was strong, if what was added was as strong as the highs on here, I could easily see this being an 8, because I think it has a well done vision. It's got some great features, and it's got Keem expanding his artistry in ways that I enjoy seeing him do. While I didn't talk about their collab album with Chelsea Wolfe in 2021 because I spun it throughout the end of the year and I didn't make a December listening log update, I rather enjoyed that album, and I thought it was a really nice meeting of worlds of sorts in the fields of heavy music. But with this new album, Love Is Not Enough, I absolutely adore seeing this band take another crack at their more straight-laced metalcore roots and create an album that feels very of the times mood-wise in the same breath. I fucking love the control the group has over the chaos that is the pace of this record, and I love how the writing and how it lends to that madness as you see this perseverance turn to just deep-seated evil. Like, self-targeted evil is just a fucking crazy experience. To see, you know, there are these echoes of Love Is Not Enough, the title track, throughout the opening that just very much pull the listener down into this just bleak mindset that gets further sort of cemented throughout the looks at the world and the way that people's minds sort of feel more moldable amidst the chaos because they just have nothing to hold on to, while being that same person in the next track to feel something where it just feels like this soulless plight to get something good in this world of shit is just a real feeling that I think the band put on display just so beautifully. The moments where they slow it down and just stew with some heavy bass and foreboding lurching like on Beyond Repair or throughout the beginning of Gilded Cage, while the band feels like they're slow burning to a bright explosion, are also equally handled just as well. For all the love I gave to Coroner's most recent album last year, this is giving me similar feelings. It sees this band playing to their core strengths while sort of putting their ideas in the current maddening world. I absolutely love this. I think that it is a strong album, a great notch in a stacked discography. I'm probably going to be giving this a 9. I think that it is a strong-ass album, and I love seeing this band still take their playbook and do something great with it. For as much as I like watching bands and producers evolve the relationship, and I think that it's very apropos that Butch Vig has done 3 albums for Silversun pickups at this point, I don't think any of these records, with maybe some years on Widow's Weed still withstanding, have culminated to anything I would say ranks amongst my favorites in the band's discography. I do think Widow's Weeds is a record that I think about more than other parts of the discography that are older and I would have some rose-tinted nostalgia for at this point. I don't think that Better Nature or parts of this culminate to anything I think adapts their sounds in any interesting ways, nor do I think as a collective unit they have any lasting unity. They more feel like batches of songs above all else. I think that some of the core of the band that's here that thrives still gets to thrive, and the production this time around I think is a notch above Better Nature, which is why I think I like this more than that at the end of the day. You know, the 3 Pete combo out of the gate of The Wreckage, Au Revoir Reservoir, and Wakey Wakey, where Brian and Nikki trade lead vocals across those 3 tracks, also act as a point where their groove-focused writing really gets to have some fun sidesteps across these 3 different types of grooves, with a bass and drum relationship that is very much idiosyncratic for this band, getting to have this time to shine, with production that, again, just suits it so fucking well. The bass production on this record as a whole, I think, is choice as hell. I will say, I think that like 3-peat out the gate is maybe the strongest moment on here, and it's a good sort of like interesting back and forth, but especially through the sort of like call to armsness of Wakey Wakey gets this middle of the record going into some high drama, but I don't think that the drama has this evolution that I think works all that well, so to speak. And that's not to say that this album feels like it's got a concept, but there's very much a sort of like emotional through line of this record that has an ebb and flow that I think ebbs really nicely, but when it comes to flow, it kind of dips and bobs and weaves. Like, I like Thorns and All. I think that it's a nice, slower groove where the production still gives it a shine. The lyrics on that song very much feel like a nice turn heel moment emotionally. And Long Gone After That, I think, is a cool idea of having this more kinetic song that's more acoustic driven, that I don't think necessarily falters, but I think that the outright slowing after that of Running Out of Sounds does, and I feel like the real rounding out of the album and the closing out doesn't necessarily have the same oomph as the start did, even if it's trying to go for more emotional chords. I just don't think that they strike those chords with any musical cohesion, or at least emotional intensity to match that musically. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think this record does ultimately fall a little short for me. It is a solid album. It has some songs that I like, but there's definitely some songs that I do not like. I'm giving this a 6 out of 10. It's very solid. But again, I don't think it ranks amongst my favorites in this band's discography at the end of the day.
From an empty bedside to an ancient ruin.
Speaking of another album I spun in February that left me wanting more, this new Willow jazz album, Petal Rock Black, is a pivot I wasn't necessarily expecting from Willow Smith, but I also don't follow her music all that closely, and considering where she started to where I last knew her doing a jazz album doesn't really seem all that wild. The fact that she links up with artists like George Clinton, Kamasi Washington, and the Tune Yards on here is also a really neat little Rolodex of artists that I think would work together well in this sort of vacuum. On paper, this is really neat. And while I like a lot of what's here, similarly to that Baby Keem album, I was left wanting more on the other side. I really enjoy some of the practices on meditation and sort of being internally conflicted and pensive. She decides to delve in throughout parts of this. Like, I think that the build up throughout vegetation that does a stark jerk into Hear Me Out is a really cool moment. I also enjoy the fun syncopated rhythms of that and Play. Like that bass groove on I Would Die For You and that fat drum groove on Omnipotent Afterward are just some juicy little nuggets on this record that I think are really good. Ultimately, I feel like this album, once it starts to get going, really, is when it starts to end. And it was weird to hear 2 albums in the same month that gave me very similar feelings in different sonic worlds, but here we are. I do enjoy the avenues with which Willow takes her style on here, and I think that the core adaptations and some of like the alt-rock stuff that also happens on here, like in some of the already aforementioned jams or on the guitar work on the track like Sitting Silently. I think it's similar to a record like When I Get Home by Solange and how it adorns its menagerie of genres into a cool listening experience. I would akin this to that, but this just feels a bit light, like on the piano play of Play, or again those interpolations like on the songs I mentioned, or on the melody play of Holy Mystery, and the scatting and arrangement on a track like Ear to the Cocoon are like these nice jazzy moments that I feel like they teeter the line of some really cool ideas, but kind of skirt it back to what feels like played a little safe. But again, I dig the vibes as a whole. I'm walking away with this as a 7, because it's a really, really solid album. I dig the sonics, I dig the production, I dig the pool of ideas here. I just wish I had a little more out of it. I just wish I had a little more of it at the end of the day, which sometimes can really be a hindrance. And considering the sort of artistic direction of this, I definitely could have seen more of this paying off well for her.
Put it on anything, put it on everything, on my soul, on my soul.
It's been 10 years since the last Bruno Mars album, if you don't include the collaborative album Silk Sonic, which to me feels like a bit of an outlier in the Bruno Mars discography for how well it balances the sonics and ideas of Bruno Mars and how well they pair well with Anderson .Paak, and how the two of them just kind of like did what I wanted Bruno to do, and that's just like really go for bold on a pastiche and reining it in, because like that's what I feel like Bruno's been kind of dancing around, or was dancing around with, throughout the lenses of 24 Karat Magic and Unorthodox Jukebox. And unfortunately, I feel like that's also the case on his newest album. But this album is like a sandwich of finding a pastiche that I feel like Bruno could really thrive in with more, and skirting around in it, but not going deep on it. Ironically enough, it's because he wants to make songs that sort of feel like him still trying to, like, appeal to the broader pop demo, and so it feels like he's spinning in circles at some points. I like the album. I like the way the album starts with Risk It All. I think it really builds up a nice introduction to Bruno adorning more of like a Latin-inspired flair, something that he does continue on Cha Cha Cha, even if a bit to sort of like surface level ish. But that sort of feels like Bruno playing Bruno in this world. So it feels a bit more in place, more so especially than what follows it up with I Just Might, a song that really sees him just going to back to the funk worlds that like were very much a part of Silk Sonic, but with lyrics that match the energy of Cha 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 in a way that I think isn't as good, if only because it feels further dissected from the worlds that he was already trying to build up. Especially considering how well he blends it with some funk and soul inspo on God Was Showing Off and on My Soul. Two more funk-leaning jams that I think are better. Keep the slow jam feel that this album has coursing throughout it, running strongly in a decent way. But I feel like the way the album rounds out, while keeping in the world, sort of feels like it's sunsetting itself a bit too early. It's a record that, like, while Bruno does make these small little records, because there aren't many huge moments, you know, for all of the highs he's been riding with the collaborators he's been in, when he comes back to his own world, he just isn't soaring as high. And that's almost feels like the biggest letdown of this project. You know, some of it just feels, a lot of it feels like it's more just like wedding reception core, in a way that, like, sure, Bruno Mars does tap into because he is very popular on a wedding dance floor. The songs that are normally in that Rolodex just feel more infectious in ways that are a bit less surface. They're a nice play on the surface that, like, I feel like is a bit more inviting to the listener. Cha 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 is the closest it gets, but, like, the moments where he isn't trying to go for that coarse or like catchy infectiousness, like on those or on Something Serious, we're left with the more album cut fodder, which I think some of which work effectively at trying to sort of what feels like reinvent his recent successes through the lenses of Nothing Left, which feels like probably the biggest anthemic moment this album reaches in its penultimate climax, but even it kind of feels like, I don't know, this should have been Die With A Smile, but Gaga was like, what if I use that song instead? It's a really solid attempt at sort of like giving that same flourish. It just kind of feels distracting considering how recent that song came out. But a song like Why You Wanna Fight, as far as sounding like trying to recapture your own successes, also feels like a Silk Sonic funk-inspired jam, more so than what sits in the Sonic world he's been sort of like crafting throughout that point in the record. But it feels like, similarly to Nothing Left, a watered-down version of that, but like more so. It feels like a weird confessional jam in the middle of this lovey-dovey song about romance all the time, which, like, would be fine if there was more of it. But considering this feels like a glimmering moment, it sort of slows the record down in this sort of awkward sidestep before getting back into the action. By the by, I think this record is solid. I think that if you liked Bruno Mars, or you like Bruno Mars as a whole, you'll find things to enjoy from this. But I think as far as following through on what I thought was a continued artistic expansion on, like, living in a Sonic template, this deviates and has some dips in ways that really set it back for me as a whole. I think it's got some solid pen pop jams. I think it's got some highs, but I would also argue this album's highs don't go for broke as boldly as his past, and even pre-Silk Sonic days. This album is solid. I'm giving it a 6. I think that it is a decent pop album, but I've heard Bruno do better, and I've heard him sort of focus a bit better than he tries to on here.
Feel free, enjoy.
كل يوم عين بعينه باجير وينه
No brand news in our
While maybe not everyone's cup of tea, one thing I've liked about Gorillaz records post Song Machine is that they've been these real slice of life adventure feeling records. Like Song Machine was a nice kaleidoscope of collaborators, and it feels like a good modernization of where the group's roots were in heavy collaborative soundscapes and genrescapes. But Cracker Island and The Mountain very much feel like the band going hard on a theme or a vibe or both, and for better or worse, trying to make it work. There's a reason why I redacted Cracker Island. I don't think it's the best culmination of songs as the record was presented, and I think that it felt very much more of an of the times record than anything the band had really done by and large. What I like about The Mountain above that is that it does still go hard on a bit of what feels like the band going on a mountain retreat in India with Black Thought and Johnny Marr, with some other friends cropping up old and new to present some POV in this world. And it has moments that feel like very similar to what they were trying to do on Cracker Island, but sticking the landing so much more, especially in some of the character-focused pieces like The Happy Dictator or The God of Lying, or how the album closes with The Sweet Prince and The Sad God. Songs that very much feel like they are speaking more to the band as characters, adding to the drama, so to speak, and I think work by and large. I think the Sparks making this bright, catchy jam was great as a single, and I think that it is a really strong tune. It also feels like a point where the band is trying to, like on parts of Cracker Island, speak on a broader message, but going a bit more on the nose with it, in a way that still feels very tongue-in-cheek, which with the Sparks again collaboration makes a whole lot of sense. But Joe Talbot's sneering sort of delivery on The God of Lying helps give an inverse and a tease at something else lying underneath that I think helps accent the vibes and round out the world. Because there is a lot of just peace and high energy and a love of the sitar on this record that I think helps really give this record a sonic identity like Cracker Island, but I like the sonic identity a hell of a lot more than, what felt like very timely vibes of Cracker Island. Sure, it's got its other moments of, like, very on-the-nose, Gorillaz, post-Plastic Beach, catchy songwriting that I think is also really good. Like on Orange County, with its grand dramatics, and I think very much taps into the same kind of lonely, isolated 2D jams that we know and love. The same with the Empty Dream Machine and the Plastic Guru, which equally feel like slices of this story for what they embody in their messaging, and again, feel like classic Gorillaz ephemera with some sounds that help blend it in with this world. I love all of Black Thought's contributions on here. Obviously, I think he's a really, really fantastic rapper, and I think that he's been on a hell of a hot streak over the last, 10 plus years, and I feel like this collaboration, this record scale collaboration with these guys is a cool move for him, and I think he fits nicely with the band, especially with the underlying vibes that fit throughout parts of the lyrics. Damascus very much feels just like a reinterpolation of stuff like the Chemical Brothers have done with Q-Tip, and I think that them reuniting with Yazzie Bey on here is super fucking cool, and I love seeing them on here. By and large, I really love where this record goes. I love the more ambient forward passages like The Hardest Thing or the Sonics of the Moon Cave and some of the less energetic moments of the Manifesto. There's a real journey this album tries to take the listener to that feels similar to what they were trying to do on a record again like Cracker Island or even a record like The Now Now, and I think sticks the landing more so than than at least Cracker Island. I don't know about The Now Now to think comparatively, but I think as a record, as a collection, The Mountain is a better Gorillaz-ifying, pacing-wise, at least classic Gorillaz-ifying pacing wise to an approach that they have tried at least a couple times in the past. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. I think that it is a strong record in the discography. I'm definitely walking away enjoying it more as a record than the last one, and I'm happy to see it. I'm happy to see these guys. I'm happy to see Damon come back with some cool ideas, and I think a really nice round table of collaborators, which I think is very indicative of what makes a Gorillaz album choice. And those were the thoughts on what I spun in February. Do you share any of these thoughts? Do you disagree? Are there any records that have come out this year that I haven't talked about yet that you'd like for me to talk about in these segments? Let me know those in the comments down below. Again, if you like this, make sure you give it a like, and if you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week, depending on what I've got going on. That's about it. I've got Perfect Dark dropping this weekend, actually, because I got it finished finally. And that's that. You guys have good days, lots of situations, and I'll see you another day.